Work. I get a tremendous kick out of seeing my ideas take form and bring concrete results. The fact that countless ideas do not work out does not take away from the pleasure I derive from those that do. I like the feel of power. You see, I am being as frank as I know how, and I like to make a money profit on my work. But the thing that keeps me going is the work itself and the sense of achievement. I cannot play as much as some men do because my eyes are not very good and my hearing is not of the best. So my play consists of a small game of poker with congenial friends, or perhaps a small bet on a horse race. As for religion, I do not know how much help it gives me. Very likely it helps me unconsciously, and it certainly must have had something to do with the formation of my ideals. Probably, it has much to do with my energy, although I have no tangible proof of it unless you consider one occasion when I was given up for dead and something pulled me through. My children, my one grandchild, my other relatives and my friends are my consolations and my happiness. You ask where in the last resort my tree's year lies. I think it lies in an almost frenzied desire to see my children and my children's children well cared for and happy. I'll wonder if you had your tongue in your cheek when you said, "We are driven to conclude that the greatest mistake in human history was the discovery of the truth." When was this discovery made? I have not seen any headlines about it in the daily papers. I have supposed that each individual among us was still hoping to mock the discovery in his own way, and that this hope constituted a large part of his life, whether H.C. was aware of it or not. The truth which different men think they have discovered is probably not the truth at all, and that is why it has not made us free. I still have my delusions, thank God, and I feel sorry for the scientists and philosophers who have thought themselves into a deep pit. One of the things I am most grateful for is the fact that through a life of hard work, of one manacling crisis after another, of one disappointment and one triumph after another, I still remain an optimist. I do not know just what my main goal is other than what I have described, but I know I would have no goal at all if I were not an optimist. Would rather remain a hard-working businessman and be as happy as I am than become the world's greatest sage and accept all the sourness and hopelessness which seem to go with much abstract thinking. Sincerely yours, Carl Lemley. This is how the problem works out in life. We are too busy living to bother much. Ultimate meanings. The obligation to get work done puts a closure on thought. The man with a family to feed has no time for conscious philosophy. If he had, he might say that the meaning of life was to feed one's family, and it would be hard to better that answer. And now look at the problem through the eyes of the president of Dartmouth College, a man of the highest repute among those who know his field. Here again we shall find a healthy distrust of thinking divorced from life. June 30, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, have read your letter of June 16 with great care and have with much seriousness considered the questions which you ask. I don't know that in the haste of the post-commencement season I can give you any statement that will helpful to you, or that will be a sufficiently lucid expression to indicate what I really feel. However, here is my attempt to do what you have asked me to do. The worth of human life seems to me to be in the opportunity it offers to. I cannot imagine anyone's questioning the worthwhileness of life, for instance, if an occasional day like this is available to him. Great expanses of blue sky, lazily drifting recessi clouds, a perfect temperature, a cloth of verdure in trees and shrubs and lawns, the glorious colors of the gardens, and the sounds I heard at daybreak of all sorts of singing birds, these are all experiences beyond measure of value, but all sufficient, it seems to me, to give to any normal mind a sentiment that it is a glorious privilege to be alive. Neither scientific analysis nor a multitude of words will describe the reason for the pleasure in the note of a violin string or the song of the white-throated sparrow, but these are not less real because they cannot be analyzed, diagnosed, and explained. For me, therefore, being, with its concomitants of abilities to feel, to think, and to do, is an inestimable BTXJ, and that life offers and not simply a justification for it to be endured. The whole modern civilized world of that's fallen subject to the fallacy that truth is an end in itself rather than that it is simply a means to an end. The approach to fullness of life is along the way of truth, but the path is not the destination. The enduring value of religion is in its challenge to aspiration and hope in the mind of man. The barrenness of much called philosophy is in its tendency to become dialectic, and to ascribe values to words which at best are inaccurate representations of thought without regard to the value of feelings. Feelings are not necessarily untrue because they cannot be expressed. Every great religious leader has in one way or another declared in substance what Jesus said, that he was come to give life, and to give it more abundantly. The philosopher has given no such assurance. H.C. not infrequently has committed himself to an intellectualism sterile of any emotional urge and denying any suffrant goal toward which life might press. The incapacity of philosophy to reign and rule seems to me to have been its obliviousness to human experience. It has herein failed to check the validity of its intellectual processes. Plato in his familiar passage on philosophers and kings long ago indicated the insufficiency of either thinking or doing as a specialized activity when one was separated from the other, until those commoner natures who pursue either to the exclusion of the other, are compelled to stand aside, then only will this, our state, have of life and hold the light of day. Yours very sincerely, Ernest M. Hopkins. Evidently religion does not die, in the vast majority of men it is still a living force for good and ill. I find a sincere note of it in the reply of Adolph Oakes, publisher of that finest achievement in modern journalism, the New York Times. By this letter I am better able to understand the solid, quiet success of this man in making his paper the most respected and the most influential in America without ever catering to the mob. October 22, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, your letter is a gem. I wish you would permit me to publish it. You ask me what meaning life has for me, what help if any religion gives me, what keeps me going, what are the sources of my inspiration and me energy, what is the goal or motive force of my toil, where I find my consolation and my happiness, where in the last resort my treasure lies. To make myself clearly, if I were able to do so, would take more time and thought than I can give the matter now. Suffice it for me to say that I inherited good health and sound moral principles. I found pleasure in work that came to my hand, and in doing it conscientiously. I found joy and satisfaction in hiring helpful to my parents and others, and in thus making my life worthwhile found happiness and consolation. My Jewish home life and religion gave me a spiritual uplift and a sense of responsibility to my subconscious better self, which I think is the within me, the unknowable, the inexplicable. This makes MC believe I am more than an animal, and that this life cannot be the end of our spiritual nature. Yours faithfully, Ikes J. Elf Oakes. More and more it stands out that a man must combine action with thought in order to lead a life that shall have unity and significance. Surely a monument like the Times is meaning enough for one life. Or crossed seas to India, and look at the young rebel who stands next only to Gandhi in leading the struggle of India for liberty, Jawaharlal Nehru, who may be the protagonist of India when Gandhi passes away. Anand Bhawan, Allahabad, India, August 20, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, your letter raises fascinating questions, fascinating and yet rather terrible. For your argument leads to the inevitable conclusion that all life is futile and all human endeavor worse than useless. You have done me the honor of putting these questions to me, but I feel my utter incompetence to answer them. Even if I had the time and leisure, which unhappily I have not at present, I would find it difficult enough to deal with the problems you have raised. Indians are supposed to find pleasure in metaphysics, but I have deliberately kept aloof from them, as I found long ago that they only confused me and brought me no solace or guidance for future action. Religion in its limited sense did not appalto me. I dabbled a little in the various sciences, as a dilettante might, and found some pleasure in them, and my horizon seemed to widen. But still I drifted and doubted and was somewhat cynical. Vague ideals possessed me, socialistic and nationalistic, and gradually they seemed to combine, and I grew to desire the freedom of India passionately, and the freedom of India signified to me not national freedom only, but the relief of the millions of her men and women from suffering and exploitation. And India became a symbol of the suffering of all the exploited in the world, and I sought to make of my intense nationalism an internationalism which included in its fold all the nations and peoples that were being exploited. I was troubled by these feelings and felt my helplessness. These seemed to be no obvious way of realizing my heart's desire. Then came Mr. Gandhi and pointed a way which seemed to promise results, or at any rate which was a way worth trying and afforded an outlet for my pent-up feeling. I plunged in, and discovered that I had at last found what I had long sought. It was in action that I found this action on behalf of a great cause which I held dear. Ever since then I have used all my strength in battling for this cause, and the recompense I have had has strengthened me, for the reward has been a fuller life with a new meaning innate to it. This is hardly an answer to your question. But not hiring a philosopher, but just a man who feels at home in action, I cannot give you a very logical or scientific answer. I have believed in science and logic and reason, and I believe in them still, but at times they seem to lack something, and life seems to be governed by other and stronger forces, instinct or an irresistible drive towards something which for the moment does not appear to fit in with science or logic as we know them. History with its record of failure, the persistence of evil in spite of all the great men and great deeds of the past, the present breakdown of civilization and its old-time ideals, and the dangers that lurk in the future, make me despair sometimes. But in spite of all this I have a feeling that the future is full of hope for humanity and for my country, and the fight for freedom that we are waging in India is bringing us nearer the realization of this hope. Do not ask me to justify this feeling, for I can give you no sufficient reasons. I can only tell you that I have found mental equilibrium and strength and inspiration in the thought that I am doing my bit for a mighty cause, and that my last stutter cannot in vain. I work for results, of course. I want to go rapidly towards my objective. But fundamentally even the results of action do not worry me so much. Action itself, so long as I am convinced that it is right action, gives me satisfaction. In my general outlook on life I am a socialist, and it is a socialist order that I should like to see established in India and the world. What will when the world becomes I do not know, and I do not very much care. The problem does arise. There is quite enough to be done now, and that is enough for me. Whether the world will ever become perfect, or even much better than it is, I shall not venture to answer. But I believe that something can be done to it. I continue to act. I am afraid I have avoided your principal question: what is the meaning or worth of human life? I cannot answer at CXCCPT by telling you how I have ked upon life and what motives have driven me to action. Sincerely yours, Jawaharlal Nehru. It is a noble spirit that speaks here. Moral idealism of mankind burns more brightly in India than anywhere else on our earth. Clay. To have a great purpose to work for, a purpose larger than ourselves, is one of the secrets of making life significant, for then the meaning and worth of the individual overflow his personal borders, and survive his death. Hear the same fine aspiration in this letter from another Hindu, the winner of the 1930 Nobel Prize for Physics, Calcutta, October 15, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, I have never believed that life is worth living simply for the moment's pleasure or tomorrow's trivial hope. The mind of man is too feeble an instrument fully to penetrate into the great mystery of this world where we find ourselves, but I have always thought that life would be worth living in order to try and understand a little more of it than we do at present. The intellectual and scientific impulse has indeed been the mainspring of my life and activities. Religious rituals and dogmas possess no significance for me, but the teachings of Buddha or Christ, if not taken too literally, have a value which I recognize and which I early have time cannot diminish. Desire to labor, to achieve, and to help others do likewise. The motive in, wares which have kept me going. I find self-control and not self-indulgence to be the real source of happiness. In the last resort, to win a victory over oneself is a greater thing than conquering the whole world. With kind regards, I am, yours sincerely, C.V. Raman. And now I come to the man who more than any other on earth today personifies the power of religion, to mold the individual and to move the mass. Shortly before leaving for the Round Table Conference in London, Mohandas Gandhi sent the following reply to my query. The omission of personal passages Mangeles the letter. Sabarmati, July 22, 1931. Dear friend, your letter of June 5. Now for your questions. Life for me is real as I believe it to be a spark of the divine. 2. Religion, not in the conventional but in the broadest sense, helps me to have a glimpse of the divine essence. This glimpse is impossible without full development of THC moral sense. Hence religion and morality are, for me, synonymous terms. 3. Striving for full realization keeps me going. This strife is the source of whatever inspiration and energy I possess. The goal is already stated. 6. My consolation and my happiness are to be found in service of all that lives, cause the divine essence is the sum total of all life. 7. My treasure lies in battling against darkness and all forces of evil. You have asked me to write at leisure and at length if I can. Unfortunately I have no leisure, and therefore writing at length is yours sincerely, M.K. Gandhi. NIS is not quite satisfactory, though we should be grateful to get so much of an answer to our question from a man with a subcontinent on his head, and laboring for the liberation of 320 MOCM men. The religion that Gandhi here professes seems so different from the anthropomorphic faith of the hymns which he sings at Sabarmati X for the rising of the sun, and there is no word here about that future life which in Hinduism as in Christianity so obsesses the minds of men. Surely the orthodox Brahmins and devout Jains who LCX K to him as their leader and saint would be a little disturbed to see how modernistic and is Gandhi's theology. The same xerate demands on credulity mark the reply of the man who first discovered Gandhi for America, John Haynes Holmes, pastor of that magnificent institution, the Community Church of New York. Mr. Holmes writes, "Dear Mr. Durant, what keeps me within me that burns like a consuming flame when I see false hypocrisy, injustice, and evil doing, something without me that pulls like the attraction of love when I catch a glimpse of what this world might be, and may yet be if we try hard enough. There was a time when I expected to AC compelish something for I died to see this world changed somewhat because of what I said or did. I cherish this individual expectation as little now. 11 endure beyond a FCW more million years. No, my eyes will close some day upon the same world upon which they first opened, just as in due time the world itself will end as it began. But meanwhile the universal creative life has been moving on like a river to some far end unseen, undreamed of, and my life, not a bit of debris but a constituent drop in the great, has bending its impulse to the onward sweep of mystic destiny. I think it is the sense of my creative capacity, matching however microscopically the creative capacity at the heart of the universe, that gives me strength to live in great good cheer in the business, too. One try to think when I laugh FCLT most happy because most alive. Certainly, in the excrescency of love, surely, also, in hours of crisis, when I have cast all on some great hazard, again, in some swift moment when a concourse of sweet sounds in symphony or opera has caught my soul and taught me to relieve the emotion of the composer in his original conception, again, when I have myself conceived, in a sudden instant, some vision of the spirit infinite clothe itself in words upon my startled lips, still when have thrown and fought to victory or defeat. Most of all, PCR haps, WHCTL I have prayed, or tried to pray, and heard faintly within myself some answer. These are all experiences of creation, of action that brings order out of chaos and beauty out of order, and thus, within its compass, makes all things new. It is in such instance that I have felt life in its raw state, so to speak, and therewith, I believe, seen it is this that keeps MC going, the knowledge, vouchsafed in passing moments when we are lifted beyond and above ourselves, that we are an essential part of a creative we ourselves, with God, our creators, and thus makers of some great cosmic future. What if I cannot SCC that future, or CVCN imagine it? Such ignorance, frankly confessed, fades like darkness before light in the actual sense experience of having lived to vaster issues. John Haynes Holmes. But to me, still strangely drawn to the faith of my youth, loving its beauty while doubting its truth, and wondering whether beauty is not truer than truth, the most appealing expression of the religious attitude came from the urbane author of The Art of Thinking, the Abbé Dimnat. His letter is long, but perhaps it will interest the reader as much as it interested me. Paris, June 29, 1931. Dear Dr. Durant, your letter reminds me of a poem of C. H. M. Guerin which you may know. It begins with these two lines, Mort la foim, assurite de die I regret 2 hours la volupta, though dead to the faith that assured me of God, I mourn to the end the delights of belief. The French poet does not psychoanalyze himself as you do, but, in the deeper strata of his consciousness, he seems to see the channels which will someday take him back to the fountainhead of his early belief. Dead to faith, you too still crave the comfort of believing, and the pathos which Guérin's rhythm imparts to his stanzas you achieve by the urgent questions quickly succeeding one another towards the end of your letter. Science has been a harsh stepmother to you. Astronomy, geology, and biology told you their tale, and there was no faith, no hope, and no love in it. You built yourself a philosophy on their data, and the philosophy might comment on itself in Remy de Gourmand's words. The horrible thing about looking for truth is that one finds it. After a few years of bitter satisfaction or purely intellectual delight as possessing those data, you have experienced the usual reaction: what is the good of knowing all these disheartening facts? Better never to have learned anything than know that the universe is a battlefield of cruel forces. Better, 1,000 times better, spend short life ignoring all this than be depressed or tortured by knowledge. Our ancestors were happier than we are. The less one knows, the happier one is. Primitive man asked no questions to which his imagination or his sense of harmony with the environing world could not give an immediate answer. He did not exhaust himself by analysis, he just lived, and the experience of each minute was enough for him. A blessed condition which intellectual enjoyment, even of a supreme nature, can never hope to rival. Feeling this, you apply to people whom you suppose to have been nearer to life than yourself, and you ask them what has kept them going, what their source of inspiration has been, what is the goal of their toil, where, in the last resort, their treasure lies. Your confession invites another enthray is no reason why it should be withheld. Belong to a generation which took CVC and more pride than your own in being scientific and ruled by facts. It certainly has been my privilege to spend the best part of my life in a Parisian sect of learning, the atmosphere of which had nothing in common with what the world concurrently connotes with the name of Paris. In the shade of our ancient elms and whitewashed walls, we lived the life of 100 years ago. We were, or tried to be, Parisian in culture, but our effort was constantly refreshed by contact with provincial honesty and provincial simplicity. Many a time a matter-of-fact conversation with the parents of some student would conjure up the turrets and gables of a manor house in Périgord or the library of a Grenoble magistrate. The vertucks of old France were in the background and, as you say, the necessities of life pressed us on all sides. A blessing, no doubt, one for which I can never be grateful enough. But our minds were xked very much as your own is. We WCRC Sorbonne Nerdurkt. Our kickers had been friends of Taine or disciples of Comte. We all dabbled in science and toyed with philosophy. I mean the philosophy of the observatory and laboratory, not that of the SCHCR/LS with which we never became acquainted till after we had been introduced to the philosophers. Philosophy was unsatisfactory, of course. What can it do in the presence of mysteries except deepen our sense of mystery? Creation, the beginnings of life, the dawn of consciousness, the appearance of vision, mind, and reflection remained inexplicable by philosophy as well as by science. Philosophy's conjectures were inadequate, but how inadequate science's facts also were. And how conflicting science's hypotheses. How unexpectedly influenced by pragmatism. How could we help noticing that, after the War of 1870, Taine and Renan suddenly turned conservatives, teaching restraint, prudence, and sobriety instead of their former radicalism? Do we not see the same phenomenon in America? Cheerful boyish unbelief ports itself in the weak lies, but the philosophical examination of conscience of the great Scarshares leads to quite a different state of mind. Pragmatism or no, there are two ways of LCX-ing at the so-called facts of science. Mink has been hopeful. There was a time when neither man nor any visible promise of man existed on our globe. Towards the end of the Tertiary Age, the miracle happened. Billions of forms of life had crowded or displaced one another without any one taking any definite ascendancy, without any epoch-making change. But, at last, man appeared, consciousness manifested itself in 1,000 ways, science was created, developed itself and finally took hold of the world in a way I never can sufficiently admire. Only the germs of this development existed 100,000 years ago, none of it could have been anticipated 1,000,000 years ago. To me the idea is full of possibilities. Astronomy may tell a disheartening tale now. But why should we infer that I will be so to the 100th generation after us? Why should we not hope that with wider comprehension, greater security will also come? You notice how violently we crave immortality in comparison with the ancient Hebrews. Why should this notion have taken such momentum if there were no foundation for the hope? I am afraid you have been a scientist strictio observantii, a fundamentalist in Kant's. Hence your pessimism. You should have been on your guard against incomplete data, against tentative systems. You should never have called science truth as USCCM to do in your letter. Your scientific certainties bred pessimism, more mistrust would have saved some hope, and there is no H0F without an admixture of faith. You ask what life has done for me. It has given me a few chances to break away from my natural selfishness, and for this I am deeply grateful. But it has also given me greater intellectual stability. The first time I saw Kant quoting with approval the imitation of Christ saying that we cannot hope to understand unless we first believe. Newman's teaching was similar. But how clear the experience of life makes it now that it is so. My faith and my reason are mutually, and that means peace. Shall I tell you? It seems impossible to me that you should not gradually come to the same if not to the same conclusions. Your letter expresses dissatisfaction violent to last. Ernest Dimnat 3 women, so much for the men. But what DCRS women think of this strange planet of ours, and her life thereon? I should judge that she has wisely refused to think ALX, it at all. Few of the letters that I have retrieved from women have, it seems to me, faced the problems stated. I suspect that woman feels these matters deeply, when she is not absorbed in the task of continuing the race, but she cannot yet find words, or superficial intellectual form, for these secret depths. Would that our enemies, i.e., our wives and sweethearts, would write a book about themselves, and honestly a revelation such a document would be seen to men. The first feminine answer is from Mary EWCX, Lee, who has made MT Holyoke College one of the finest of our SCHTX, LS for girls. October 22, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, life grows in meaning as I go on. It has not only more significance but, also, more happiness, fewer of depression than when I was a girl. At the basis of this increasing significance is religion. I think that if it were not for that I could not go on, for I am more conscious of the suffering of the world, more troubled by it. I cannot quite understand how a human being can face life without a Clif and a supreme power, a personality with whom communion can be a real thing. My creed is a simple one, with little theology earned X, died in it. Jesus Christ is to me the supreme revelation of LOVC and so of God, and his life an inspiration showing how a human life may be lived in kind if not in Grek. Find motive force of toil also in other lives, some that I have known personally, others only historically. THC fact that there have been human lives of power and beauty is a stimulus to living. My own mother and father have been a part of that stimulus, showing in an inconspicuous way what love can accomplish in a human life. Another motive force of toil I find in the chance to have a part in bringing out THC possibilities of other lives. I do not see how one can work for years with young people, as I have done, and be a pessimist. I have seen too many lives develop into something fin and strong. As for consolations and happiness, I think that they come all along the way. I am writing on an October morning, in the height of the autumn glory, when just to be alive is inspiration, and when the gray days come and moments of depression, the realization that God's in his heaven, even though far from feeling that all's right with the world, gives consolation and happiness. So come back to religion as that which keeps me merry. From Italy came an apparently simple, and yet probably fundamental reply. It is from Gina Lombroso, daughter of a great psychologist, wife of a great historian, Guillermo Ferrero, an authoress and thinker in her own right. Villa Iolivello, Strada in Chianti, Florence, Italy. Dear Sir, many thanks for your letter. The problem you ask me is the problem which has worried me as every other human being. The sincere answer I succeeded in giving to myself is that the real reason of being is love. Love which ties us one to the other, while living, which ties us to those who have left us, to our posterity. I perfectly remember that when I was a girl I thought my life was tied indissolubly to that of my father, I thought I was born only to help him, I thought I had to disappear with him. After his death I remained tied in the same way to my husband, to my children. I think that the primordial reason of living is love. Love for the family is the best known and the easiest. When I had some experience in life, the reason of my life has been to synthesize this so that as many people as possible could make a use of it. In both cases it is the love which ties one to the other which is the reason of life. Love for the family first. I am a woman. Love for all those which have some resemblances with us and will pass by the same experiences. With my best regards, Gina Lamrasso. But by far the most interesting reply from a woman was that of Helen Wills Moody. Her very existence is in itself good reason for living. She has done more than 1,000 impresarios of anatomy and millinery to glorify the American girl, and the American girl at her best or the European girl at her best is a sumscient achievement of protoplasm to warrant some faith and pride in life. She writes almost as well as she plays. June 10, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, a 25-year-old must be cautious about what he, or she, says upon such tremendous subjects as you have named in your letter. One of the signs of youth is the feeling that one has all the philosophy of life neatly pigeonholed. If this is true, it must be, then, that I am quite old, as I am really not quite certain about anything. The only thing that I know I really want, is some means of exercising the restlessness which seems to be continually in my heart. Tennis, painting, almost anything will do. As a child I didn't know what it was, but now I think that I recognize it. It is the reason why I have played tennis so fast and furiously for so many years. It is the reason why I studied diligently when at SCHCX, and even cried when I did not happen to get a in spelling. It is why I tried so hard to win a Phi Beta Kappa Kiefer scholarship in college, which I did, but would have wept, I know, if I had not. I hope to heaven this restlessness, this constant of arriving at some degree of perfection is not a peculiar form of conceit. To me, it is religion. It is a motive force of toil, of such toil as I have done. By working steadily on the thing that I like, I can remove from my mind momentary spells of sadness or irritation or anger, and afterwards feel happy and almost peaceful. I hope that this constant restlessness, this wish to inaction and on the way towards attaining some degree of is interwoven with the love of the beautiful. It may even that they are very closely related. It is difficult for me to find words. I know that in contemplating the beauty of perfection in an art, I seem to root to another sphere, more words, but I cannot find the right ones. Music, sculpture and, to the greatest degree, painting. In speaking of perfection in art I do not mean, of course, smoothness or slickness in finish, which is the old-fashioned perfect. In UPN color combinations in art and in nature, never nature in art, if I may use a commonplace description, I find that I am unable to swallow, such emotion seems to close in upon me, and that I have a correspondingly violent mental reaction. Perfection and beauty fascinate me in any field, but most of all in art, and there in the abstract sense. Each one thinks himself unique in his feelings, no doubt, and here I am trying to read into the restlessness of my heart a special significance, when the same thing is to be found, perhaps, in the heart of every other young person of my age living in our restless country. I do know that I do not wish to conform to rules of religion that are laid out like so many squares bounded by fences that you must go here, that you cannot go there. I loathe the form of religion. And I know that I would hate life I were deprived of the right of trying, hunting, working for some objective within which there lies the beauty of perfection. In my hall there stands an antique Greek head of a woman in cream-colored marble. She was left me as part of a legacy about a year ago. She is really from ancient Greece, and, except for several small scars, has echoed the centuries with nose, brows, and chin intact. The head is in profile against a cream-colored wall. It stands on a dark marble pedestal. At different times of day the light changes on the face. Times it is faint, so faint upon her forehead, cheek, and nose, that her sensitive head scarcely stands away from the cream wall behind. At other times, the light is bright, and the clear-cut profile with its strong yet delicate chin, and thoughtful brows stand out clearly, dominatingly. The curling tendrils of her hair are followed back along her head by the light, almost to where they meet to form the knot. Her neck is strong and rounded and firm. I like to close my eyes and run my fingers over the contours of her face, and thrill each time in discovering modeling that my eye had not detected. It is almost as if you could not know the message of her face until you CBSED your eyes, and actually felt it through your fingertips. She came from a collector's gallery, but with her, to me, came no history. I know that she is beautiful and that she is nearly perfect. When LTYK at the head I have moments of great pleasure, and it makes me feel all the more keenly my restlessness, my desire for activity which has as its goal some sort of crowdy imperfection. For me, life is interesting, entertaining, happy, if only I can have some activity for the restlessness that is in my heart. I want that activity to be careless, never finished, and I would like to have it at almost all times dominating my thoughts. I would like to have a one-track mind, not closed, of course, to information, because I would like to know about everything, but I would like to be able to enclose myself on my engine on my one track and close my door like a clam closes his, and rush away towards the horizon and the infinite, or whatever its name is. You ask, where in the last resort your treasure lies, and I would answer if I knew, if I were only absolutely certain, and dared, within myself. But it is ridiculous for one of 25 to say that he thinks he is certain. Perhaps I could give you a more coherent description of what I think of life had I been able to absorb the year and a half of philosophy that I had at college. Although I took many notes, and made elaborate outlines with headings, subheadings, and so on, I somehow missed the point. A young author who had just won the Guggenheim Prize for his first novel, who was full of enthusiasm about life in general, told me a story last spring in Paris which made me decide that I would have another try at philosophy. The story was about a philosopher named Santayana. Upon hearing the name, I remembered having read several by him at college. I had vaguely believed him to be some philosopher of the Far East with that name. But it seems not. In fact, he seems to have been a human being who was once at Harvard. This is the story. It was spring. The warm sunshine and soft breezes were trying to lure students away from their classes. Santayana was seated at his desk reading to his students. His listeners were sitting, or reclining, in various attitudes of inattention. Santayana's voice trailed off, his eyes traveled over his students, and fixed themselves on a tree which grew outside the window. Its leaves were small and tender, and of the green of new leaves. Santayana closed the book. A short silence elapsed. He rose, and said, "Gentlemen, it is spring." He took his hat and never returned. I'll hope this story is true. I hope he went away, got on his one track, and has been going along happily ever since. HC is, I'll imagine, in his restlessness seeking something which will explain crowdy imperfection. He derives his joy, I'll imagine, from the ceaseless activity which GCRS with the quest. No doubt, at least, I imagine, the sculptor who formed my Greek head out of marble had in his heart this restlessness, this desire to search for perfection, and he derived pleasure from his work. It may have been that his greatest happiness came to him on the days when he was chiseling out of marble the contours of this lovely face. That was hundreds of years ago. Today I am thrilled, as I go down my hallway, in seeing this Greek head and understanding, I think, its message. The message of the restless heart. I want to be restless, I want always to in action, and to be trying for some kind of imperfection. Even if I may lacking in talent, I shall have the pleasure of action, and there is always H0F at least in a young, restless heart. The other fopple that you have written to, will have clearly expressed answers to give you. I wish that I had. I wish I could see George Bernard Shaw's. HC once told me that tennis should be played in a meadow, with grass affixed high, and with no balls. At least, what I have told you is what I truly believe. You must keep in mind several things when you judge my letter. 1. That I am the youngest on your list, and 2. That I am the only one who got on your list through brawn and not brain. Most sincerely, Helen Wills. P.S. I have concluded that restlessness is a disease. I didn't say much ATX, UT tennis because it comes under the heading, activity because of restlessness. P.S. If I have enough paint, a large studio, light, there are always thousands of things to paint, then I am so happy in the activity of painting that I do not care about what astronomers predict, biologists declare, or what love is said to be or what has happened to religion. I am sure that I am hatefully selfish. Septics and lazy bones. The last group is composed of septics. Perhaps we should end with them if only to remind ourselves that, in the last resort, our question is unanswerable. And first from the bad boy of England, scandalisque of all continents, and prospective terror of the House of Lords. Dear Mr. Durant, June 20th, 1931. I am sorry to say that at the moment I am so busy as to be convinced that life has no meaning whatever. I do not see that we can judge what would the result of the discovery of truth, since none has hitherto been discovered. Yours sincerely, Bertrand Russell. Second, and most honest of all, from a man who does not care to add to another writer's royalties. On tour in Switzerland, dear Mr. Durant, August 8, 1931. It is absolutely impossible to answer such questions as you ask in any serious way in the frame of a letter. Besides, when stating my ideas, I prefer using my own setting to providing material for the book of another author. Yours truly, Count Hermann Kaiserling. And last and shortest, and perhaps wisest, a bearing the gigantic head and Tolstoyan face of GBS, and these pithy words in meticulous, impeccable hand, 4, Whitehall Court SW 1 June 18, 1931. How the devil do I know? Has the question itself any meaning? G. Bernard Shaw. So that is the end of our rope. How shall we answer this villainous and murderous postal? Is it inaccessible to catch the meaning of life without getting outside of it to judge it, or without seeing it as part of a larger? Which of us can do that? This is a merry termination of our quest. A disturbing illustration of the old definition of metaphysics as a search in a dark hole for a rat that is not there. Shall we give up the quest? Not at all. Now let us FACC the matter for ourselves. Chapter 111 Letters to a Suicide *. The popularity of suicide. Dear unknown, I have received the announcement of your prospective suicide, and am impressed by the premises you offer for your violent conclusion. That even the simplest man should kill himself is a sufficient indictment of life to stir the attention of a student of human affairs, and the daily percession of suicides is one of the bitterest facts that must included in an honest philosophy. Otherwise, the death of any one of us received, in several from declaring their intention of I have together here the of my with them. And add 3, in passing, some comments OA in first chaplet of this as crow see the who so me with their tragedies killed, but attribute this to the ogen cy of my argumentes, which, as frail intellectual things, must be doper, bird to reality of pain. Pahapes is no will to milia of just a tuk is no instinct solitude. There have 28442 and in the suicide rassi in nuipes a chronological item of no great import in the eye of nature. Men must endure their going hence even as their coming hither. What interests me in you is the apparent logic of your despair, the completeness with which you survey all life and knowledge, and find them, like Ecclesiastes, discouraging and vain. I ask you to reason with me for a while, even though I know the story of the policeman, who after many appeals, persuaded the would-be suicide to stop and talk the matter over. In the end, as you will recall, they jumped off the bridge. It is possible that in discussing with you the value of life I shall convinced, instead, of the attractiveness of death. I take my chance. concessions to suicide. Let me confess at once that I cannot answer, in any absolute or metaphysical sense, your question as to the meaning of life. I suspect that there is some ultimate significance to everything, though I know that our little minds will never fathom it. For the meaning of anything must lie in its relation to some wholly of which it is a part, and how could any fragment or moment of life, like you or me, pretend to rise cut of its individual cell and survey or understand the entirety of things? We play with words like world and life, eternity and infinite, beginning and end, but in our hearts we know that these are only the badges of our ignorance. We shall never understand what they ought to mean. Philosophy, after deposing God, has put man in his place, and endowed man with universal concepts and cosmic perspectives which could belong only to a supreme and supernatural intelligence. Perhaps if we face frankly our mental limitations we shall take even our pessimism more modestly. We shall LCX upon that gloomy picture of the world which contemporary science paints as one fleeting form in the kaleidoscope of human opinion. We shall remember that there is nothing certain or permanent about that picture, and that the future will probably smile at it as today we smile at Aquinas and Anselm, Scotus, and Abelard. Let us not take the astronomers seriously. They do not know whence our planet came nor whither it is bound, when it began or when it will cease to w. In truth they are as great guessers as the philosophers. As for the geologists, their exuberant cartography of the earth therefore history is only a charming play of fancy. They cannot be sure of their extinct continents and seas, and perhaps the fossil strata have tumbled themselves about just to deceive these puzzled readers of the rocks. They do not know how old man is, or whether the Ice Age really existed, or whether it put an end to civilization. The physicists do not know what matter is, nor the biologists what life is, nor the psychologists what consciousness is. Their brave dogmas are passing emphases on parts or aspects mistaken for wholes. You must not shoot your brains out on the basis of these airy hypotheses. If you do you will join the long list of those holy martyrs who died for absurdities. We must learn to skeptical even of our scientists. It seems a little ridiculous to found your despair upon the mechanical philosophy which Spencer has left us as a relic of his mid-Victorian simplicity. While critics and novelists are taking mechanism for granted, the Sikhs which fought so bravely for it are calling it in doubt, and withdraw in confusion before the complexity and willfulness of the atom and the cell. It is hardly likely that we have personal immortal souls, but it is even less likely that WC are machines mechanically mourning our mechanism. Such a philosophy is no reason for suicide, it is reason for a gale of laughter hearty enough to sweep all the dogmas from the infallible vacillating laboratories of the world. What we can be certain of in science is not its metaphysical assumptions but its physical achievements. The steamship, the airplane, and public sanitation are a little more real than this effervescence of test tubes into philosophy. Take a night flight over New York, and feel the reckless courage and power of these machines called men, accept without apology the thrill of peril and speed, rejoice over the realities of science, and smile at its transcendental theories. There is no knowable limit to what this trousered ape will do with his multiplying discoveries. Doubtless he will someday throw his engines around the stars, and deport his criminals to Betelgeuse. If you insist upon dying, undertake tasks of some danger and use in adding to these discoveries, risk yourself in medical or mechanical experiment, and give some significance to your life and death. But whatever you do, don't die of philosophy. If you pass from science to industry and politics as an invitation to suicide, you may find a surer firm which to catapult yourself into eternity. I grant you that our economic and political life is in chaos, and that if we can invent no system for organizing the work and government of the world, we may as well surrender the earth to another species, or another race. It is true that all government irks us, and that men have been as misruled and discontent under monarchies and aristocracies as under our present democracy of British and spoils, and perhaps in our anger at the breakdown of our acquisitive economy in the 20th century we forget ungratefully its turbulent creativeness in the 19th. No other system had ever produced such wealth or spread such comforts, but I would not want to cover up with vain optimism these leaking sessions of our public life. It is better to exaggerate them than to minimize them, provided that we do not let our imperfect perspective sadden and embitter us into a futile despair. Remember that the same greed which has concentrated our wealth so narrowly, and diminished its purchasing lies in our souls that the only difference in motive between the rich man and ourselves is seldom a difference in scruples, but is usually a difference in opportunity and skill. In the end we're all guilty togthker. Let us stop complaining about others, and begin to root the evil out of our own hearts. The roots of our greed, however, stand so strong and deep in biology and history that we must not expect to eradicate them in a generation, or a century. Our ancestors gorged themselves when they found because they could not know how SCNN they would find food again. Pigs of all species gorge themselves similarly today, and it was in this primitive uncertainty that human greed was born. Our vices were once virtues, necessary in the struggle for existence. They are the tribute which we pay to our origins. We must accept these vestigial relics with a certain equanimity, like our vermiform appendices and our supernumerary glands. Until life is quite secure, and no man need worry food for himself and those dependent upon him, men will continue to acquire greedily, and to hoard against evil days. Perhaps we shall control this impulse by governmental assurance and regimentation of work and wages for all, or perhaps greed will continue to decrease, as fear has decreased, through the multiplication of wealth and the growth of provision and order. Meanwhile it is natural that people should be acquisitive, that they should judge men according to their success in winning security, and that nations should rise or fall according to their economic XWER. In the end, it must be confessed, bread is more important than books, and art is a luxury made possible by wealth. If we see these things in their historical place we shall not tear out our hair, or blow out our brains, because only a majority of our people have clothing, shelter, and automobiles, schools and libraries, and an equal right with the rich man to imbibe advertisements and saxophones from the air, and murder and adultery from the screen. We shall realize that even in our depression things are better than they were in our youth, and we shall resolve to make them better still for our children. Is it true that progress is a delusion? Yes, if you mean uninterrupted, general, or everlasting progress. Progress as we know it in history is subject to many setbacks, never moves evenly all along the line. Our progress in science and industry is not accompanied now by progress in philosophy and art, and at some distant date, presumably, all its works will be destroyed. But to doubt its reality because of its end would be like calling the sun a delusion because it will set. Even that distant end to progress is a resumption, conceded here. Out of argumentative generosity, we are not sure of it, and meanwhile there is much evidence for believing that the material, physical and mental status of the average man on the earth, bad as that status is higher than it ever was before. Students despair of their own age because they compare the average man of their acquaintance with the exceptional men of the past. Let them study a little further, and they will find that not all the Athenians were geniuses, and that not all of these geniuses were saints. They will discover, behind Plato and Aristides, a corrupt democracy, a suppressed womanhood, a superstitious people, and a brutal mob. States come and go, and civilizations are in great measure lost. But so much of these dead cultures remain that if we were to devote a whole lifetime to the task of absorbing even the Greek fraction of our mental heritage we could not possibly encompass it all. Euripides and Aristotle are not dead, Confucius and Lucretius are our contemporaries, even Hammurabi and Ptolemy speak to us intelligibly across 4,000 years. And our means of preserving, transmitting and disseminating this mounting cultural inheritance of knowledge, morals, and arts are more abundant than in any age of the past. The most depressing sight in our civilization is not poverty, for even the of Louisiana Darka can have a certain dignity and content, but the apparent deterioration in the moral fiber of the race. It is hard to judge of these things, partly because one's experience is so brief, partly because we judge the morals of today with the standards of yesterday. We forget that these standards were made for an agricultural life, and can have no absolute validity in an industrial and urban age. It is ridiculous to exercit the morals of a rural community from men delaying marriage till 30, and living amid the million contacts, opportunities, and stimuli of the city. Other times, other morals. The more I see of men and women, the less critical I am of them. They are not half so bad as their newspapers and moving pictures make them out to be. It is cause they are prosaically decent that they demand, for the vicarious fulfillment of ancient impulses to polygamy and the chase, that their press and their films shall reek with promiscuity and crime. Nevertheless, a subtle degeneration, not so much in morals as in character, seems to have begun in our people. Through the wisdom of our legislators, only the intelligent may contracept, while the stupid are commanded to reproduce their kind. In result, the educated minority, rich or PNR, brings up less than its share of the next generation, the uneducated majority brings up more. In each generation we create by education a brain for our scriety, and then, by the dysgenic effect of our legislation, we cut it 0k again. The educator is frustrated, and superstition, that infame which Voltaire thought he had crushed, flourishes as before, leaving progress to be created and maintained by a precarious and sterile fragment of the race. In this unregulated reproductivity of the mob lies the secret of our corruption, and the raw material of our municipal machines goes to pieces because there is always a majority of fools. Perhaps in this way the old Yankee type, full of endurance and grit, is being breeded out, and a new type, less vigorous in thought and courage, is taking its place. Our cowardice in this depression has no precedent in our history. Never did we whine so, or so unanimously bring all our troubles to one man's door. Our tradition of individual freedom has left the film director and the theatrical producer free to enrich themselves by parading pornography, recklessly accelerating youthful sex development, and the impulses so precociously aroused find such mechanical facilities and opt for their expression that our city populations tend to lose themselves at the LX, in crime and at the top in sex. The end product at the top is a blasé and cynical Epicurean who would take to his heels at the first call of hardship or danger. Nations do not grow great on such men. We smile at the Puritan today, but it may just THC virtues of the Puritan that will be needed or are needed now when crisis comes, the same stern self-discipline, the same stoic capacity to suffer and persevere, which made nearly all the strong characters in modern history from Luther to Lenin. This jolly riot of sex, so pleasant to THC individual and so hazardous to the race, is bound up, no doubt, with the decay of solar natural relief, and we are engaged at the moment in a gigantic experiment with the possibility of maintaining social order and racial vitality through a moral code resting solely on the earth, and shorn of those supports which once suspended it from the skies. That experiment failed in Athens, and it failed in Renaissance Italy. Apparently it is dangerous to the race to emancipate the individual, destroy his delusions, and the villain ceases to breed. This PRCXS has already undermined the Anglo-Saxon leadership of America in literature, morals, and municipal politics. As it goes on, the same PRCS will probably weaken all the peoples of Western Europe and North America. In the interim we shall, in all likelihood, have a cultural outburst like that of Florence and Rome in the days of the Medici, and in the end we shall be an extinct volcano, and Asia will mount again the throne of the world, until it, too, becomes very intelligent and dies. You will see that I am granting you a great deal, that life has no meaning outside of its own terrestrial self, that the individual has no immortality, and that every civilization, as surely as every flower, decays. These conclusions seem to me now so natural that they do not disturb me any more. I perceive that within the limits set by them I have still much room to find significance for my life and race, and even a moderate content. This Byronic pose of our youth, which wished to die because Santa Claus was dead, wears away as the realities of life catch us in their grip and sweep us into action. We find less and less time for morning idle dreams, and we observe that our children do not pine as we did for myths which they have never believed. The meaning of life, then, must lie within itself. It must be independent of individual death, even of national decay. It must be sought in life's own instinctive cravings and natural fulfillments. NVHY, for example, should we ask for an ulterior meaning to vitality and health, would be goods in their own right, even if they were not also means to racial ends. If you are sick beyond cure, I will grant you viaticum, and ICT you die, let me not to the ending of botched lives put an enverdiment. But if you are well, if you can stand on your legs and digest your food, forget your whining, and shout your gratitude to the sun. The simplest meaning of life, then, is joy, the exhilaration of experience itself, of physical well-being, sheer satisfaction of muscle and sense, of palate, and ear and sigh. If the child is happier than the man, it is because it has more body and less soul, and understands that nature comes before philosophy. It asks for no further meaning to its arms and legs than their abounding use. Perhaps if we used our arms and legs we would be happy too, and golf, which invented for George Babbitt, is justified by every mile that is walked and every ball that is lost. Even if life had no meaning except for its moments of beauty, and we are not sure that it has more, that would be enough. This plodding through the rain, or fighting the wind, or tramping the snow under the sun, or watching the twilight turn into night, is reason aplenty for loving life. Let death come. Meanwhile I have seen the purple hills of South Dakota, and one point of a star taking its place quietly in the evening sky. Nature will destroy me, but she has a right to. She made me, and burned my senses with 1,000 delights. She gave me all that she will take away. How shall I ever thank her sufficiently for these 5 senses of mine, these fingers and lips, these eyes and ears, this restless tongue and this gigantic nose? Do not be so ungrateful about love. To ignore its psychological developments is as unrealistic as to forget its physiological basis. Yes, at it is a matter of hydraulic pressure and chemical irritation, but at the top it becomes, occasionally, a ballade of devotion and chivalry, no longer mutual itching, but mutual consideration. I have not in mind here merely romantic love, that idealization of the object which comes with frustrated desire, and is now disappearing because desire is not so frustrated as before. I refer to the attachment of mates or friends who have gone hand in hand through much hell, some purgatory, and a little heaven, and have been soldered into unity by being burned together in the flame of life. I know that such mates or comrades quarrel regularly, and get each other's nerves, but there is ample recompense for that in the unconscious consciousness that someone is interested in you, depends upon you, exaggerates you, and is waiting to meet you at the station. Solitude is worse than war. I suspect that most pessimists are bachelors. Married men have no time for GLCXJRN. By a pessimist I do not mean one who has a realistic awareness of the evils and hardships of human life. I mean one who, unable to face those hardships with equanimity, concludes from his own weakness that all life is a worthless snare. Perhaps a deal of this pessimism comes from thinking of ourselves as individuals, as complete and separate entities. I note that those who are colks rating parts of a whole do not despond. The despised yokel playing ball with his fellows in the lot is happier than these isolated thinkers, who stand aside from the game of life and degenerate through the separation. Be a whole or join a whole, said Goethe. If we think of ourselves as part of a living, no merely theoretical, group, we shall find life a little fuller, perhaps even more significant. For to give life a meaning one must have a purpose larger than one's self, and more enduring than one's life. If, as we said at the outset, a thing has significance only through its relation as part to a larger whole, then, though we cannot give a metaphysical and universal meaning to all life in general, we can say of any life in particular that its meaning lies in its relation to something larger than itself. Hence the greater fullness of the married and parental, as compared with the celibate and sterile, life. A man feels significant in proportion as he contributes, physically or mentally, to the entity of which he acknowledges himself a part. We who are too superior to belong to groups, who are too wise to marry or too clever to have children, find life empty and vain, and wonder has it any meaning. But ask the father of sons and daughters, what is the meaning of life, and he will answer you very simply, feeding your family. The attraction of the sexes which, when taken in isolation from its biological function, seems a delusion and a vain pursuit, becomes a road to fulfillment and a modest significance when surrendered to heartily in the continuity of life. Here on the train from Morgantown to Pittsburgh is a woman all smiles, playing with her child. Oh, you unhappy intellectuals of the you think you are profounder than that woman? And you sophist scientist, vainly seeking to understand the part in terms of the part, can you not see that this woman is a greater philosopher than you, cause she has forgotten herself as a part, and has found a place in the whole? A personal confession this, then, I should say, is the road to significance and content. Join a whole, and work for it with all your body and mind. The meaning of life lies in the chance it gives us to produce, or to contribute to, some thing greater than ourselves. It need not be a family, that, so to speak, is the direct and broadest road, which nature in her blind wisdom has provided for even the simplest soul. It may be any group that can call out all the latent nobility of the individual, and give him a cause to work for that shall not be shattered by his death. It may be some revolutionary to which a man or a woman gives devotion unstintingly, or it may be a great state to whose preservation and exaltation some Pericles or Akbar devotes his genius and his life. It may occasionally be some work of beauty that absorbs the soul in its making, and comes a bckn to many generations. But in every case it must, if it will give a life meaning, lift the individual out of himself, and make him a cooperating part of a vaster scheme. The secret of significance and content is to have a task which consumes all one's energies, and makes human life a little richer than before. As for myself, for I wish to answer directly the questions which I have asked of so many others, the meaning of life lies perhaps narrowly in my family and my work. I wish I could boast of consecration to a larger cause. The sources of my energy are egotism and a selfish altruism, the greed for applause, and a mad devotion to those dependent upon me. The goal and motive force of my see happiness around me, and to win, at last, the approval of my isters. The haunts of happiness, my home and my ink and my pen. I would not call myself happy. No man can be quite happy in the midst of the poverty and suffering that still survive about him today, but I am content, and inexpressibly grateful. Where, in the last resort, does my treasure lie? Everything. A man should have many irons in the fire. He should not let his happiness be up entirely with his children, or his fame, or his prosperity, or even his health, but he should be able to find nourishment for his content in any one of these, even if all the rest are taken away. My last resort, I think, would be nature herself. Shorn of all other gifts and GCXJDS, I should find, I hope, sufficient courage for existence in any mood of field and sky, or, shorn of sight, in some concourse of sweet uns, or some eright's memory of a day that smiled. All in all, experience is a illusly rich panorama, from which any sane should be able to draw sustenance for living. The hardest question of all to answer is, what help does religion give me? As I write the query down, I look out of the moving window and see, in the valley Exlo, a little hamlet gathered about a church. I can imagine what incredible theological nonsense is preached under that white spire, what bigotry and sectarian are nourished there, and with what terror and hatred these simple toilers of the soil will defend the faith that so solicitously protects them from our passing truth. But my health goes out to them. I think I like them better than the village atheist who knows so well how to say the right thing at the wrong time. To be in haste to destroy the faith of such people is surely the mark of a shallow and ungenerous mind. Nevertheless, I cannot believe, in the face of biology, in the eternity of the individual self, nor, in the face of history, can I believe in a personal God. But unlike the tougher minds of my time, I miss these encouragements, and cannot quite forget the with which they surrounded my youth. There is something ridiculous in the idea of a supreme being that should be at all like a man, even like Leonardo or Goethe, but I should be grateful to anyone who could persuade me of this delectable absurdity. There is nothing selfish in the desire for personal immortality, and a heaven crowded to suffocation with interminable egos would be an insufferable place, but I suspect that I shall be sorry to go, and should be glad to know, when I am gone, what fate befalls my children and my friends, and the causes I tried to serve. So that, though the dogmas of the old faith have gone from me and offer me no support today, they have left in me an aroma of their memory, as, to use an old figure, a certain fragrance may linger in a RCX, TN from which flowers have recently removed. So much of the old remains that I cannot accept the crude mechanism which content so many of my generation, and am pleased to find symbolic profundities in the ancient creed. Possibly in the end faith, ever clamoring to herd, will break down my doubts, and I shall go the way of Huysmans and Chesterton. My readers should aware of what I write when I am old. What immortality means to me now is that we are all parts of a whole, cells in the of life, that the death of the part is the life of the whole, and that though as individuals we pass away, yet the whole is made forever different by what we have done, and what means to me is the first cause, or source of all life and energy, in which we live and move and have our erring, and the final cause, or goal, and extent of our striving and aspiration, that distant perfection which is not but may. Perhaps that great whole, to which in all generations the greatest soul shave devoted themselves, will, in tomorrow's religion, be called God. But here I have lost myself so much in myself that I have forgotten you, my unknown soldier of despair, who are about to commit suicide. You will see that what you need is not philosophy, buoy, a wife and a child, and hard work. Voltaire once remarked that he might occasionally have killed himself, had he not had so much work on his hands. I notice again that it is only leisurely people who despair. If you can find no work in this chaotic industrial system of ours, go out to the first farmer and ask him to let you his hired hand for your and a bed until litter things come. If he is afflicted with that incredible disease called overproduction, agree that you will produce only as much as you can consume. Perhaps when we are all permitted to consume as much as we shall have no overproduction anymore. In the end I know how vain and snobbish all advice is, and how hard it is for one human being to understand another. Come and spend an hour with me, and I will show you a path through the woods which will better dissuade you from surrender than all the arguments of my BCX, KSQ, me, and tell me what a childish optimist I am. Lay about you freely, and damn this middling world as you will, I shall agree with everything but your conclusion. Then we shall eat the bread of peace together, and let the prattle of the children restore our youth. Appendix being a communication from convict Sing Sing prison after the foregoing manuscript had Tren prepared, it occurred to the publishers to send a copy of the initial letter to a man recently sentenced to life imprisonment as a fourth offender. What meaning did life seem to have from the viewpoint of one so unjustly condemned to apparently so empty a future? Any reply was so well thought out, and so well expressed, that it commanded a place in this symposium. It is incredible that we should be unable to find any better use for such intelligence than to LXK it up forever. An eminent author and philosopher seeks an answer to that age-old question, what is the meaning or worth of human life? An equally eminent publisher asked me how I manage to bear it in my present session. To the philosopher, I, a man serving a life term behind prison walls, answer that the meaning life has for me depends upon, and is only limited by, my ability to recognize its great truths and to learn and profit by the lessons they teach me. In Sean, life is worth just what I am willing to strive to make it worth. To the publisher, I say that life, even from within prison walls, can is intensely interesting, as vitally worthwhile as it is to any man on the outside. It all depends upon the faith one has in the soundness of his philosophy. My philosophy of life is a homely one, compounded of many simple beliefs of which truth is the guiding star. Upon my ability to see life in its true select, I depend for that mental equilibrium without which I find myself drifting in a welter of conjecture and contradictory speculation. We are driven to conclude, argues the philosopher, that the greatest mistake in human history was the discovery of truth. It has not made us happy, for it has not made us free, except from delusions that comforted us and restraints that preserved us. It has taken from us every reason for existence except the moment's pleasure and tomorrow's trivial hope. If our happiness and our reason for existence depended upon our inherent tendency to seek comfort in delusions, false tradition, and superstition, then I could agree. We should be unhappy when truth deprived us of their questionable consolation, but they do not. Truth is not trautiful, neither is it ugly. Why should it be either? Truth is truth, just as figures are figures. When a man wishes to learn the exact condition of his business affairs, he employs figures and, if these figures reveal a set state of his affairs, he DCRSNT condemn them and say that they are unlovely and accuse them of having disillusioned him. Why then condemn truth, when it only serves him in this enterprise of life as figures serve him in his commercial enterprises? That idol-worshipping strain in our natures has visioned a figure of truth draped in royal raiment and, when truth in its humble form, sends drapery, to us, we cry, disillusionment. Custom and tradition have caused us to confuse youth with our custom, tradition, and our of living have led us to believe we cannot be happy, save under certain physical conditions possessed of certain material comforts. This is not truth, it is erlief. Truth tells us that happiness is a state of mental contentment. Contentment can be found on a desert island, in a little town, or the tenements of a large city. It can be found in the palaces of the rich or the hovels of the poor. Confinement in prison DCXSNT cause unhappiness, else all those who are free would be happy. Poverty doesn't cause it, else the rich all would be happy. Those who live and die in one small town are often as happy, or happier than many who spend their entire lives in travel. I once knew an aged Negro who could not tell the meaning of one letter from that of another, yet he was happier than the college professor for whom he worked. Hindus are happy, so are the Chinese, the Africans, the Spaniards, and the Turks. The North, the South, the East, and the West all contain happy persons. There are celebrities who are happy, and there are many happy living obscure lives. Happiness is neither racial, nor financial, nor neither is it geographical. What then can it be, and from what deep well does it spring? Reason tells us that it is a form of mental contentment, and if this be true, its logical als jade must within the mind. The mind, so we are told, is capable of rising above matter. Can we be wrong then in assuming that mental contentment may be achieved under any condition, even in prison? There are some who would have us believe that thought, discovery, and invention have revealed life as a rather hopeless venture, and mankind a helpless pawn and med to go down to defeat and oblivion, and from this GLCX, RNY prospect man turns and exclaims, "What's the use?" Natural history teaches us that in the grade of evolution, which is the only true and not comparative progress, certain forms of life, unable to adjust themselves to evolutionary changes, have been entirely blotted out. These were devoid of that constructive instinct we call invention. Life is in a constant state of change, and the development of thought and invention enables us to adjust ourselves to these changes. In fact, our very fitness, our only hope of survival, upon the fertility of our inventiveness. The prehistoric fish, when it developed legs with which to climb from its then native habitat or element, was as much of an inventor as were the Wright brothers. T.S. Eliot draws us a very convincing picture of a chaotic world in the wasteland, but I dare to question the premise upon which he paints his picture. Science, discovery, thought and deduction all tell me that the world is a living symbol of orderliness, that evolution is blind only according to man's standards of blindness, that chaos exists only in the minds of men. Reason will not permit me to see life in any other aspect. To me, life is like a river, moving ever forward. There are eddies and cross currents, but the main stream sweeps onward. Life cannot retrogress, neither can man. He is an integral part of the universe in which he lives, that universe which is ever moving forward to some appointed destiny. That life was accidental is a theory I'm willing to accept, but it DTXSRFT follow that it need be meaningless. Any man who has thought deeply enough to arrive at the conclusion that life is without meaning must surely be an intelligent man. Intelligent persons do not do meaningless things, yet these exponents of this doctrine continue to live. I am forced to conclude from this that they do not feel entirely in sympathy with their doctrine. Each time I pick up a newspaper and read of some man committing suicide, I say, there was a man who truly believed that life was without meaning. Those who decry the machine age as heralding the decadence of the race, do not stop to consider that manual labor is not a natural but an acquired habit of man. It was a crude means by which primitive man sought to adjust himself, sought to survive, for accomplishing those tasks and overcoming those obstacles which life presents. The machine is simply a quicker, more efficient means to the same end, man's struggle to keep abreast, to survive. just as man has changed his of living, so must he change his thoughts, his habits, and perhaps even his form. Back in the dim eons of time man has made several physical changes, why not in the far distant future toward which we are traveling? Up from the deeps of the sea to the shallows came life, up from the shallows to the land. This evening I stood in the prison yard amid other prisoni, with eyes lifted aloft, gazing at that great, beautiful sight, the airship Los Angeles as it sailed majestically over our heads. Into my mind came the thought that, just as that prehistoric creature struggled up out of the sea to the land, so is man struggling up from the land into the air. Who dare deny that, someday, up, ever up he will through the great reaches of interstellar space to wrest from it the knowledge which will enable him to lift his life to a plane as high this, our present one, as it is ATX, VE that of prehistoric man. I do not know to what great end destiny leads us, nor do I care very much. Long before that end, I shall have played my part, my lines, and past how I play that part is all that concerns me. In the knowledge that I am an inalienable part of this great, wonderful, upward movement called life, and that nothing, neither pestilence, nor physical affliction, nor depression, nor prison, can take away from me my part, lies my consolation, my inspiration, and my treasure. Owen C. Middleton.